The coffee in Amy's mug had gone cold hours ago, but she barely noticed as she stared at the data streaming across her screen. The numbers told a story that made her stomach twist with dread. Every human colony world had received the same transmission. This morning, mandatory genetic compliance. Screening would begin in 30 days. Amy Torres had been a xenobiologist for 15 years, ever since humanity joined the galactic community as a Class C species. She understood what those clinical terms really meant. The Galactic Consortium wanted to rewire human brains, to strip away the very qualities that made her species unique. They called it optimization, but Amy knew it was slavery with extra steps. The lab around her buzzed with nervous energy as her colleagues tried to process the announcement. The blue-skinned Corvins who supervised their research facility moved through the corridors with their usual arrogance, but Amy caught hints of satisfaction in their alien expressions. They had been waiting for this moment, outside her window. The city of New Melbourne sprawled across the horizon of Kepler 7. Human families went about their daily lives, unaware that their government had already agreed to the consortium's demands. The politicians claimed they had no choice, that resistance would mean economic sanctions and military intervention. Amy wondered if those same politicians would feel differently when their own children were dragged into the modification. Centers. Her communicator chirped softly. The message was from her old friend David, a physicist working in the outer colonies. The text was simple but carried hidden meaning that only she would understand. Remember what we discussed about Earth's ancient predators? Some sleeping giants? Air stirring. Amy deleted the message immediately and tried to focus on her work, but her hands shook as she manipulated the genetic sequences on her display. The consortium had made a fundamental error in their assessment of humanity. They saw a species without natural weapons, without thick hides or venomous fangs, and assumed humans were naturally docile. They had never bothered to study why Earth's apex predator had no claws. The answer was simple: humans didn't need them. 3 days later, Amy watched the first group of volunteers enter the Corvin treatment facility. They were mostly young people who had been convinced that modification would give them better opportunities in consortium space. Some were parents who hoped the procedure would secure safer lives for their children. All of them trusted that their government wouldn't let anything truly harmful happen to them. The facility looked like a medical center, all clean white walls and softly humming machinery. The Corvins had spent considerable effort making the process appear benign. Patients were sedated, placed in sleek pods, and emerged hours later with glazed expressions and compliant smiles. Amy felt sick as she recognized one of the volunteers. Matt had been her research assistant, a brilliant young man with dreams of exploring the galaxy's mysteries. The person who emerged from the pod still looked like Matt, but something essential had been burned out of his mind. When Amy spoke to him, he responded with polite efficiency but none of his former enthusiasm. His eyes held no curiosity, no spark of the rebellious intelligence that had made him such a gifted scientist. That night, Amy received another message. This one contained only coordinates and a time. She found herself driving to an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city, her heart pounding with fear and anticipation. Inside, she discovered she wasn't alone in her horror at what was happening to her species. The gathering included people from every walk of life. Scientists, engineers, military personnel, dock workers, teachers, and farmers. What united them was a shared understanding that humanity was facing extinction, not as individuals but as a free-thinking species. The consortium's modifications wouldn't kill their bodies, but they would murder their souls. Alex Reed stepped forward from the group. Amy knew him by reputation as one of the colony's shipping coordinators, a man who had spent years moving cargo between human settlements. She hadn't expected to see him at a clandestine meeting of potential rebels. "The message came through tonight," Alex said quietly. "Operation Prometheus is active. Every human world received the same signal hidden in routine shipping manifests. We're not the only ones who refuse to accept this fate." Amy felt a chill run down her spine. She had heard whispers about Prometheus over the years, rumors of a secret human organization that had been preparing for the day when the consortium showed its true nature. Most people dismiss such talk as paranoid fantasy, but the evidence was becoming harder to ignore. "What does that mean for us?" asked a woman Amy didn't recognize. Alex's expression grew grim. "It means we have a choice. We can submit to modification and spend the rest of our lives as living tools for alien masters, or we can remember what our ancestors were capable of when their survival was threatened." The meeting broke up before dawn, but Amy couldn't sleep. When she returned home, she kept thinking about Matt's empty eyes, about the thousands of humans who would undergo the same procedure in the coming weeks. The consortium had made their intentions clear. Humanity would be transformed into a species of willing servants, grateful for the privilege of serving their betters. By the time the sun rose over New Melbourne, Amy had made her decision. She began copying her research files onto hidden drives, focusing on the genetic studies that might prove useful to the resistance. If humanity was going to fight back, they would need every advantage they could get. The Corvans had made one critical mistake in their assessment of human nature. They had seen a species that preferred cooperation over conflict and assumed this made humans weak. They failed to understand that human cooperation wasn't a sign of weakness, but rather the foundation of their greatest strength. When humans worked together toward a common goal, they became something far more dangerous than any individual predator. Amy smiled grimly as she sealed the last data packet. The consortium was about to learn why Earth's history was written in the bones of every apex predator that had ever challenged humanity's ancestors. Some lessons could only be taught in blood, and humans had always been excellent teachers. The mining equipment on Asteroid Belt Station 7 had been running continuously for 18 months, chewing through rock and extracting precious metals for the consortium's endless construction projects. The Corvan overseer rarely bothered to inspect the operation personally, trusting that human workers would continue their assigned tasks without supervision. This proved to be a fatal assumption. Deep within the asteroid's carved-out chambers, David Park wiped sweat from his forehead as he made final adjustments to the device that would change everything. To any casual observer, it looked like a standard or processing unit, but David had spent 2 years secretly modifying its internal components. Instead of refining metals, the machine now served as a quantum communication relay capable of sending instantaneous messages across the galaxy. David had been working toward this moment since he first heard whispers about Operation Prometheus during his graduate studies on Earth. The plan had seemed impossibly ambitious then, a secret network of human scientists and engineers scattered across consortium space, all preparing for the day when their species would need to fight for survival. The signal went out at exactly midnight, Galactic Standard Time, across human space. Thousands of seemingly ordinary installations received the coded message hidden within routine mining reports and shipping manifests. Cargo haulers that had spent years plying trade routes between human colonies suddenly revealed their true purpose as mobile weapons platforms and command centers. Captain Luke Hayes felt the familiar thrill of combat as his ship, the Merchant Vessel Opportunity, shed its disguise. Hidden panels slid away to expose missile batteries and railgun turrets that had been concealed for years beneath false cargo containers. Around him, his crew worked with practiced efficiency to bring the ship's real systems online. The Opportunity had spent 3 years posing as a simple freight hauler, moving supplies between human settlements while its crew carefully studied Corvan patrol patterns and defensive installations. Every shipping run had been a reconnaissance mission, gathering intelligence that would prove invaluable when the time came to strike. Luke's target was Corvan Station Alpha, the administrative center where the genetic modification program was being coordinated. The station's commanders had grown complacent over the decades, confident that no Class C species would dare challenge consortium authority. Their defensive systems were designed to repel attacks from other major powers, not from supposedly primitive human vessels. The first indication of trouble came when the station's sensors detected energy signatures that didn't match any known human technology. The watch officer, a veteran Corvan with decades of experience, stared at his displays in confusion as the readings showed weapon systems that should have been far beyond human capabilities. His confusion turned to alarm as 6 more vessels decloaked around the station, each one broadcasting identification codes as harmless civilian craft while simultaneously targeting critical systems with military-grade scanners. The Corvan officer reached for the emergency communication panel, but his systems died before he could send a distress signal. The attack lasted exactly 17 minutes. Luke's ships used a combination of kinetic weapons and electromagnetic pulse devices that the Corvans had never encountered before. Their energy shields, designed to deflect plasma bolts and particle beams, offered no protection against solid projectiles traveling at significant fractions of light speed, but the real surprise came when the humans deployed their secret weapon. Silver clouds of microscopic machines swarmed over the station's hull, seeking out access ports and maintenance hatches. Within minutes, every Corvan computer system began to fail as the nanobots rewrote their basic programming codes. The technology had been developed in hidden laboratories on Earth's moon, where human scientists had spent decades reverse engineering captured alien devices. The nanobots were programmed to recognize and disable any technology not based on human design principles, effectively turning the consortium's technological advantage into a fatal weakness. As news of the successful attack spread through hidden channels, similar strikes began across the galaxy. Human cargo ships that had been dismissed as harmless trading vessels revealed themselves as sophisticated warships. Mining operations that had appeared to be simple extraction facilities activated weapon systems that had been built into asteroid cores over years of patient preparation. Dr. Maria Santos coordinated the uprising from a secret base hidden within Earth's ocean depths. The facility had been constructed over 2 decades, funded by a network of human corporations that had secretly diverted resources from legitimate business operations. From her command center, Maria watched as red dots appeared on her tactical display, each one representing a successful strike against consortium infrastructure. The Corvans weren't the only species to face human wrath. The reptilian Draxi found their bioweapon research facilities under attack by humans who had somehow acquired immunity to their most deadly toxins. The insectoid hive queens discovered that their swarm ships were vulnerable to sonic weapons that disrupted their collective communication frequencies. Each attack revealed the same disturbing pattern. Humans had been studying their alien neighbors for decades, identifying weaknesses and developing countermeasures in secret. While the consortium species had grown comfortable with their technological superiority, humans had been learning, adapting, and preparing for the day when they would need to fight for their freedom. Tom Bradley led the defense of New Terra when the consortium finally organized a counterattack. The planet appeared to be an easy target, with minimal orbital defenses and a population that had always seemed compliant with alien authority. The approaching Draxi fleet expected to make quick work of the human settlement and move on to more challenging targets. They discovered their mistake when New Terra's surface opened like a flower, revealing massive weapons installations that had been hidden beneath fake agricultural facilities and mining operations. The planet itself had been transformed into a fortress over the course of 30 years, with an entire network of underground bunkers and weapon systems that had never appeared on any consortium survey. The psychological impact of the human uprising began to spread throughout consortium space. Species that had always viewed humans as harmless servants started to question everything they thought they knew about their Class C neighbors. Stories began to circulate about human resilience, about workers who had endured conditions that would kill most other species, about colonists who had thrived on worlds that others considered uninhabitable. As the first phase of Operation Prometheus concluded, one thing had become clear to every species in the galaxy: humanity was no longer content to serve as anyone's junior partner. The sleeping giant had awakened, and it was hungry for blood. The emergency session of the Consortium Council convened in the highest security chamber on Dominion Prime, but the atmosphere was far from confident. For the first time in 3 millennia, the 12 ruling species found themselves facing a threat they couldn't simply crush through superior firepower and technology. General Korvax of the Draxi Military Command slammed his scaled fist against the conference table, his reptilian features twisted with rage. These humans are an infection that must be burned out completely. My biological weapons will reduce their colonies to sterile wastelands within days. The Hive Queen's translator buzzed with electronic harmony as her thoughts were converted to spoken words. The swarms agree. Human settlements will be consumed, their nutrients redistributed to more worthy species. This rebellion ends now. But Admiral Kate Morrison had been expecting exactly this response from her command ship in the Outer Rim. Kate watched the tactical display as Consortium forces moved to crush the human uprising. The alien commanders were following predictable patterns, relying on the same overwhelming force tactics that had served them for centuries. They had learned nothing from their initial defeats. Kate had spent 40 years in the human merchant marine, traveling to every corner of Consortium space and studying alien military doctrine. She understood that the Consortium's greatest weakness was their inability to adapt quickly to new threats. Their rigid hierarchies and species-based prejudices made them slow to recognize when their fundamental assumptions were wrong. The Draxi bioweapons struck first, targeting agricultural worlds where human families had built new lives among alien crops and livestock. The engineered viruses were designed to be absolutely lethal to human physiology, breaking down cellular structures at the molecular level. The reptilian generals expected to watch human colonies die in agony as their weapons spread across entire continents. Instead, they watched in horror as their bioweapons turned against them. Dr. Maria Santos had anticipated this attack for years, working with captured Draxi samples to develop not just vaccines but offensive countermeasures. The modified viruses that emerged from human laboratories were specifically tailored to target reptilian DNA, causing rapid organ failure in any Draxi who came into contact with the altered pathogens. The irony wasn't lost on Maria as she watched Draxi military units flee from planets they had intended to sterilize. The same arrogance that had led them to use biological weapons against civilians now ensured their own destruction. Within weeks, entire Draxi colonies were under quarantine as their own weapons turned their worlds into death traps. Tom Bradley found himself commanding the defense of New Terra when the Hive Queen's swarm fleets arrived in overwhelming numbers. The insectoid ships moved with perfect coordination, their pilots linked through quantum entanglement into a collective consciousness that made them nearly impossible to outmaneuver. But Tom had a secret weapon that the Hive Queens couldn't anticipate. Deep beneath New Terra's surface, human engineers had spent years studying captured swarm technology and developing sonic weapons that could disrupt the quantum frequencies used for Hive communication. When the attack began, the planet's hidden transmitters activated simultaneously, broadcasting carefully tuned interference patterns across multiple dimensions. The effect was immediate and devastating. Swarm pilots who had operated in perfect harmony for their entire lives suddenly found themselves cut off from the collective consciousness. Individual insects, bred for specialized roles within the hive structure, proved incapable of independent decision-making. Their formations dissolved into chaos as thousands of ships collided with each other or simply drifted aimlessly through space. The psychological impact of these defeats rippled throughout Consortium space. Species that had dominated the galaxy for millennia found themselves facing an enemy that seemed to anticipate their every move. Worse, they realized that humans had been studying them for decades, learning their weaknesses while pretending to be harmless servants. Captain Luke Hayes led the assault on the Corvan home system, where the blue-skinned aliens had retreated to regroup after losing most of their forward bases. The Corvans had always prided themselves on their military precision and technological superiority, but they discovered that human tactics were unlike anything they had encountered before. Luke's forces didn't attempt to match Corvan ships in direct combat. Instead, they used hit-and-run attacks that targeted supply lines and communication networks. Human vessels would appear without warning, strike critical infrastructure, and vanish before enemy reinforcements could respond. The Corvans found themselves fighting shadows, always one step behind an enemy that refused to engage on their terms. The breakthrough came when human infiltrators, posing as maintenance workers and civilian contractors, activated nanobotic viruses within Corvan computer systems across their entire home fleet. In a matter of hours, the most advanced military force in the galaxy found itself unable to communicate, navigate, or even control basic life support systems. Alex Reed coordinated the liberation of Class C worlds across 3 sectors, but he quickly discovered that his mission was more complex than simply defeating consortium forces. Many of the oppressed species had spent centuries accepting their inferior status, and some were genuinely afraid of what might happen if the established order collapsed completely. The breakthrough came when Alex began broadcasting evidence of what the consortium had really planned for all Class C species. Hidden documents recovered from captured facilities revealed that genetic modification was only the first step in a program designed to transform entire civilizations into specialized slave races. Some species were to be modified for physical labor, others for intellectual tasks, and many were marked for complete extinction. Once they were no longer useful, the revelation sparked revolts across the galaxy as previously compliant species realized that their only choice was between slavery and freedom. The human rebellion became something larger, a galaxy-wide uprising of every civilization that had been oppressed by consortium rule. Amy Torres found herself leading medical teams that worked to reverse the genetic modifications that had already been performed on human volunteers. The process was dangerous and not always successful, but Amy was determined to save as many minds as possible from the consortium's neural programming. Working with advanced medical technology captured from Corvan facilities, Amy's teams developed techniques that could restore much of what had been lost to the modification process. Matt, her former research assistant, was among the first to undergo the reversal procedure. When he emerged from the medical pod, his eyes held traces of their former intelligence. Though the experience had left him forever changed, the Battle of Nexus Gate marked the beginning of the end for consortium resistance. The massive fortress had been considered impregnable, protected by overlapping defensive systems and garrisoned by elite forces from all 12 ruling species. Admiral Kate Morrison led the human fleet in what should have been a suicide mission against the strongest military installation in the galaxy. Instead, it became the largest military defeat in galactic history. Kate's forces used a combination of nanobotic infiltration, sonic disruption, and kinetic bombardment that overwhelmed every defensive system simultaneously. More importantly, they captured the facility intact, along with the complete strategic database that contained every consortium military secret. As news of the victory spread, the remaining consortium forces began to surrender or simply abandon their positions. The rebellion had become an unstoppable tide that swept away 3,000 years of galactic order in a matter of months. The galaxy would never again underestimate the species that had evolved from Earth's ancient predators. The interrogation chamber deep within captured Nexus Gate held secrets that would have shocked even hardened human military commanders. Amy Torres sat across from a Corvan intelligence officer, watching as the alien's blue skin grew pale with each revelation he was forced to provide under the influence of human-developed truth. RUMS. Amy had volunteered for this assignment despite having no formal training in interrogation techniques. Her background as a xenobiologist made her uniquely qualified to understand the full implications of what the consortium had planned for humanity and other Class C species. What she learned in those sterile rooms beneath the fortress would haunt her for the rest of her life. The genetic modification program had been only the beginning. Hidden files revealed that the consortium planned to reduce all Class C species to specialized biological tools, with different modifications for different purposes. Humans were to be divided into categories, some modified for physical labor in hazardous environments, others for complex intellectual tasks, and a small breeding population maintained to produce new workers as needed. But the files contained something even more disturbing. Earth itself was scheduled for what the consortium termed planetary optimization. The entire atmosphere would be gradually altered to support Corvan physiology, while human-friendly conditions were eliminated completely. Any humans not already in the modification program would simply suffocate as their home. World became uninhabitable. Amy's hands shook as she read technical specifications for atmospheric processing equipment that had already been secretly deployed to Earth's orbital stations. The timeline showed that the process would have begun within 2 years, disguised as terraforming research for improved agricultural productivity. The revelations sparked a change in human military strategy. What had begun as a defensive war for survival transformed into something far more systematic and ruthless. The evidence made it clear that the consortium viewed other species not as potential equals, but as biological resources to be harvested and modified according to their needs. Captain Alex Reed received new orders as he led the assault on Dominion Prime, the consortium's capital world. This wasn't to be a military conquest in the traditional sense, but rather a complete dismantling of the power structure that had oppressed half the galaxy for 3 millennia. Every government facility was to be systematically destroyed, every military commander eliminated, and every weapon facility reduced to radioactive slag. The consortium species tried desperately to negotiate as human forces closed in on their core worlds. Diplomatic envoys broadcast messages of surrender, offering reparations and promising to respect human autonomy in exchange for mercy. They discovered that humans, when truly enraged, were capable of a cold calculation that made their own military. Commanders seem emotional by comparison. Admiral Kate Morrison addressed the consortium's surrender offer from the bridge of her flagship as it approached Dominion Prime. Her response was broadcast across the galaxy so that every species could understand humanity's position clearly. The time for negotiation ended when you decided to lobotomize our children, Tate said, her voice carrying the weight of absolute conviction. You didn't seek to conquer us or rule us. You tried to erase us as thinking beings while keeping our bodies alive to serve your purposes. There can be no forgiveness for that crime, and no guarantee that you won't attempt it again if given the chance. The systematic destruction of consortium infrastructure began immediately. Human forces had learned that half measures only invited future conflicts, and they had no intention of leaving their enemies with the capability to rebuild their military power. Dr. David Park coordinated the deployment of nanobotic viruses that would permanently disable any attempt to reconstruct advanced weapon systems on former consortium worlds. The Silver Swarm spread across entire solar systems, seeking out manufacturing facilities, research installations, and military bases. Unlike the temporary disruption systems used in earlier battles, these nanobots were designed to remain active indefinitely, continuously sabotaging any technology that exceeded predetermined complexity limits. The former consortium species would be reduced to pre-industrial capability levels for generations to come, but the humans weren't content with merely preventing future military threats. They systematically hunted down every research facility where the genetic modification experiments had been conducted, along with the scientists who had developed and implemented the programs. The trials that followed were broadcast across the galaxy, ensuring that every species understood exactly what had been planned for them. Dr. Maria Santos oversaw the justice proceedings that would determine the fate of captured consortium scientists. The humans had captured detailed records of every experiment, every test subject, and every planned modification. The evidence was overwhelming, but Maria wanted to ensure that the galaxy understood the full scope of what had been intended. The most chilling testimony came from Corvan researchers who had expressed frustration at the slow pace of the modification program. Internal communications revealed plans to accelerate the process by using unwilling subjects, including children as young as 5 years old. Some scientists have proposed using Class C species as test subjects for even more extreme modifications, including attempts to create hybrid creatures. Combining traits from multiple species, the sentences were carried out with the same methodical efficiency that had characterized the entire human war effort. Scientists who had gleefully modified unwilling subjects found themselves undergoing the same procedures. but with modifications designed to ensure they experienced every moment of terror and helplessness their victims had endured. Tom Bradley led the occupation forces on former consortium worlds, overseeing the transition from military conquest to long-term control. The humans had learned from studying galactic history that successful rebellions required not just military victory but also the complete transformation of existing power structures. The solution was both elegant and terrifying in its implications. Rather than attempting to govern alien populations directly, the humans simply made it impossible for the former consortium species to threaten anyone ever again. Their technology was permanently crippled, their military leadership eliminated, and their populations scattered across worlds that could barely support basic agriculture. Some former consortium worlds were left completely uninhabited, their populations relocated to planets with harsher conditions that would require all their efforts simply to survive. Others were placed under the supervision of formerly oppressed species who had suffered under consortium rule and could be trusted to prevent any resurgence of imperial ambitions. Luke Hayes commanded the final assault on the consortium's most secure research facility, hidden in a space station at the edge of the galaxy. The facility had been working on projects so classified that even high-ranking military officials knew only fragments of what was being developed there. What the humans found inside defied their worst expectations. The consortium hadn't just planned to modify existing species, but to create entirely new forms of life designed specifically for slavery. Biological computers that could think but had no capacity for independent will. Warrior creatures bred for absolute obedience to their creators. Living weapons that could be deployed against any species that resisted consortium authority. The facility was destroyed so thoroughly that not even molecular traces remained, but the discovery reinforced humanity's conviction that they had made the right choice in showing no mercy to their former oppressors. The galaxy had been one generation away from witnessing horrors that would have made the current war seem like a minor disagreement. As the last consortium strongholds fell, the surviving alien leaders finally understood the magnitude of their miscalculation. They had awakened something in humanity that could not be reasoned with, negotiated with, or appeased. The species that had seemed so harmless and cooperative had revealed itself to be the most dangerous predator the galaxy had ever seen. The reckoning was complete, but the real work was just beginning. 5 years had passed since the last consortium stronghold fell, and the galaxy bore little resemblance to the ordered civilization that had existed before humanity's awakening. From her office in Tara Station, Admiral Kate Morrison surveyed a star map that showed the new reality of galactic politics with satisfaction and grim determination. The former consortium species were scattered across the outer rim, their once mighty civilizations reduced to struggling colonies on marginal worlds. The proud Corvans who had once commanded fleets of advanced warships now worked in agricultural communes under constant human supervision, their blue skin darkened by honest labor under alien suns. The reptilian Draxi found themselves confined to desert worlds where their natural advantages meant little when faced with the basic challenge of growing enough food to survive. Kate's transformation from merchant, marine officer to galactic leader still surprised her sometimes, but she had learned to accept the responsibilities that history had thrust upon her. Humanity hadn't sought to rule the galaxy, but they had discovered that leaving their former oppressors with any capacity for technological development was simply too dangerous to contemplate. The Liberation Coalition met in monthly sessions at Tara Station, bringing together representatives from over 300 species that had once been classified as Class C civilizations. The humans served as acknowledged leaders of the Alliance, but Kate was careful to ensure that every species had a voice in determining their own future within the new order. Dr. Amy Torres had spent the last 3 years establishing the Institute for Galactic Justice, a massive research organization dedicated to ensuring that nothing like the consortium could ever rise again. Her teams worked constantly to monitor former consortium populations for signs of technological advancement beyond approved levels, while also developing new countermeasures against potential threats. the Institute's headquarters occupied an entire asteroid that had been hollowed out and converted into the most secure facility in known space. Deep within its chambers, Amy maintained genetic samples and cultural records from every known species, ensuring that no civilization could be completely erased even if it faced extinction. The irony wasn't lost on her that humans now served as protectors of diversity after nearly becoming victims of genocide themselves. The monitoring systems that Amy's teams had developed were both sophisticated and relentless. Quantum sensors tracked every technological development on former consortium worlds, while nanobotic agents ensured that any attempt to build advanced weapons or communication systems would fail before completion. The former oppressors had been reduced to a technology level that posed no threat to anyone, and the humans intended to keep them there permanently. Captain Alex Reed now commanded the Retribution Fleet, a force specifically designed to hunt down the remnants of consortium leadership who had escaped the initial purges. His ships patrolled the deepest regions of space, following leads to hidden bases where former officials plotted their return to power. The work was often tedious, involving months of investigation to track down individuals who had spent years preparing for this exact situation. But Alex found satisfaction in each successful mission, knowing that every captured fugitive represented justice for the billions of beings who had suffered under consortium rule. His latest mission had taken him to the edge of charted space, where intelligence reports suggested a group of former Corvan admirals had established a secret research facility. The facility was supposed to be working on ways to circumvent human nanobotic countermeasures, potentially developing technology that could threaten the new galactic order. Alex's forces moved with practiced efficiency, surrounding the facility before its occupants could escape or destroy their research. What they found inside confirmed their worst fears. The Corvans had been attempting to develop biological weapons specifically designed to target human physiology. The discovery triggered an immediate response from human command structures. Within hours, additional Retribution Fleet units were dispatched to conduct sweeps of every system where former consortium officials might be hiding. The message was clear: any attempt to threaten humanity or its allies would be met with immediate and overwhelming force. Tom Bradley oversaw the educational programs that were slowly transforming the culture of former consortium worlds. The humans had learned that military occupation alone wasn't sufficient to prevent future conflicts. They needed to change the fundamental mindset that had made the consortium's atrocities possible. Children on former consortium worlds now learned about the rights of all sentient beings, regardless of their species' technological level or military capability. The old hierarchies based on power and conquest were replaced with principles of cooperation and mutual respect. Those who adapted to the new order found their lives improve significantly, while those who clung to the old ways found themselves increasingly isolated. The transformation wasn't always smooth or voluntary. Some adult populations proved resistant to change, clinging to beliefs about species superiority that had been ingrained for thousands of years. These individuals often found themselves relocated to remote settlements where their influence couldn't spread to younger generations. Dr. Maria Santos continued her work developing medical technologies that could reverse the effects of consortium genetic modifications, but she had also taken on a new role as head of the Coalition Health Authority. Her organization ensured that all species in the new galactic order had access to advanced medical care, regardless of their former status under consortium rule. The work was particularly challenging when dealing with species that had been heavily modified by consortium scientists. Some populations had been altered so extensively that returning them to their original state would be more traumatic than helpful. Maria's teams worked carefully to develop treatments that could restore lost capabilities while preserving beneficial changes that the modified individuals wished to keep. Luke Hayes had transitioned from military commander to diplomatic liaison, helping newly liberated species integrate into the coalition structure. His experience in combat had taught him valuable lessons about reading alien body language and understanding the psychological factors that motivated different cultures. The diplomatic work often proved more challenging than military operations. Many species carried deep trauma from their experiences under consortium rule, while others struggled with sudden freedom after generations of servitude. Luke found himself mediating disputes between species that had old grievances against each other, while also helping to establish trade relationships and cultural exchanges that would strengthen the coalition over time. The new galactic order that emerged from the ashes of the consortium was both more chaotic and more stable than what had existed before. Without a central authority imposing uniform standards across all species, the galaxy saw an explosion of cultural and technological diversity as different civilizations developed along their own unique paths. But this diversity existed within carefully maintained boundaries. The humans had made it clear that while they welcomed different approaches to civilization and technology, any attempt to develop weapons of mass destruction or engage in conquest would be met with immediate intervention. The galaxy had learned to fear humanity's capacity for organized violence, and most species preferred to test the boundaries of acceptable behavior. The patrol routes that human ships followed had become as regular and predictable as trade winds, providing a sense of security that allowed commerce and cultural exchange to flourish. Species that had been enemies under consortium rule found common ground in their shared desire to build something better than what had come before. David Park now served as head of the Coalition Technology Council, overseeing the careful distribution of advanced knowledge to species that could use it responsibly. The humans had captured thousands of years' worth of scientific research when they defeated the consortium, but they were selective about which technologies they shared and with whom. The goal was to ensure that all coalition species could improve their quality of life and expand their capabilities, while preventing any single civilization from gaining the power to threaten others. It was a delicate balance that required constant monitoring and adjustment, but David found the work deeply satisfying after years of preparing for war. As Kate Morrison stood before the great observation windows of Terra Station, watching ships from dozens of different species dock at the facility's massive ports, she reflected on how far humanity had come from their days as a Class C civilization. They had not only survived an attempt at genocide, but had emerged as the dominant force in galactic politics. The responsibility was enormous, but Kate was confident that humanity was suited for the role. Their species had learned hard lessons about the price of freedom and the importance of vigilance against tyranny. They would not make the consortium's mistake of believing that might made right, but they would also never again allow anyone to threaten the liberty of thinking beings. The galaxy had found peace, but it was the peace that comes from understanding exactly who holds the leash and why it can never be loosened. Humanity had not sought to become galactic guardians, but they had accepted the role with the same grim determination that had carried them from Earth's caves to the stars themselves. The message echoed across every inhabited world: humans were done being anyone's slaves, and the galaxy would spend generations learning to live with the consequences of having pushed them too far. The children born in this new era would grow up in a universe where freedom was not negotiable and where the rights of sentient beings were protected by the most efficient military force the galaxy had ever seen. They would inherit a cosmos where diversity flourished under the watchful eyes of a species that had learned the true cost of complacency. In the end, the consortium's greatest mistake had been their assumption that humanity's cooperative nature made them weak. They failed to understand that human cooperation wasn't a limitation, but rather the foundation of their species' most terrifying capability: the ability to work together toward a common goal with absolute determination and ruthless efficiency. The former consortium species would spend the rest of their existence as living reminders of what happened when apex predators were pushed beyond their breaking point. Their scattered colonies served as monuments to the simple truth that had taken the galaxy 3 millennia to learn: some species were meant to rule, and some were meant to serve. Humanity had never wanted to be rulers, but they had proven themselves willing to accept any burden if it meant protecting the freedom of those who couldn't protect themselves. The galaxy was safer now, more diverse, and more just than it had ever been under consortium rule. But it was also more dangerous for anyone foolish enough to challenge the new order. As the stars wheeled overhead and trade ships carried goods and ideas between 1,000 different worlds, one fact remained constant across every inhabited system: the humans were watching, and they would never again allow tyranny to take root in their galaxy. The age of human dominance had begun, and it would last as long as there were those who needed protection from the darkness that lurked in the hearts of would-be conquerors. Earth's children had claimed their birthright among the stars, and they would defend it with the same savage efficiency that had carried their ancestors through ice ages and extinction events. The galaxy belonged to humanity now, not through conquest, but through the simple recognition that some species were simply better suited to the responsibilities of power. And in the end, that made all the difference.